Hello, everyone. I'm Charlie, seasoned fundraiser, host, and producer of Fixing the Philanthropic Flow, a series powered by IG Advisors where we bring you the voices of fundraising and grant making activists who inspire us.
And hi everyone, I'm Harriette, an advisor at IG and also a seasoned grant maker turned resource activist.
Here at IG, we work with the philanthropy, business, and not for profit sectors to bring about social and environmental change. Today, we are going to be speaking with one of our wonderful Fix the Flow fellows, Mara. Mara, could you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your fundraising journey, please?
Sure. I'm Mara Clarke. I am an American who lives in London, and I am the co-founder of a Dutch charity called Supporting Abortions for Everyone, or S.A.F.E. And in terms of my fundraising journey, I am an activist first, and a fundraiser and a grant maker second. And my fundraising journey started when I started a charity. I'd done practical support direct activism in the past, but I had never done any fundraising or started a charity. So I started a charity in 2009, and that was the beginning of my fundraising journey. My role as a fundraiser has always been alongside being a founder or director of a small grassroots client-facing charity. So I've always felt a little bit like an interloper in the fundraising space because it's not something that I have studied or have practiced. It's something that I've picked up as I've gone along. And also, while of course the money is the most important part of the work, because without the money, you can't do the work is always the most important thing. So I'm a mistress of conflicting priorities at all times. And one thing I found in the fellowship is that I had the benefit of being the chief exec, or the managing director, as well as the fundraiser. And so in talking to other fundraisers, it's been really interesting to address some of the misunderstandings or conflicts or questions that can arise from people who are just fundraisers within an organization. I feel like sometimes both an interloper and also a spy in fundraising spaces. But it's been a pretty wild journey, I have to say.
That's really interesting because normally on our Fix the Flow fellowship, we get to know people as fundraisers or grant makers who initially want to try and learn how to play the game and really master their craft. And then eventually, after going through the fellowship, they end up associating with this term resource activists around actually changing the system. But it sounds like you were already there with activism coming first and fundraising coming second.
Well, yeah, and the thing that I like to talk about is the fact that my previous organization was a registered UK charity. When we started, it was completely volunteer run, no staff for the first 5 or 6 years of operations, and almost all of our money was from individual donors. So I think in the first 5 or 6 years of operations, we got like 1 or 2 grants. One was for like 1,000 and one was for like 7,000. And when I left the organization in 2022, the budget was £600,000. And again, 90% of that was regular donors. And when I started the new organization, which I co-founded in February 2023, so we're about to turn 2, we've done it the reverse way, which is that we got some institutional funding right at the beginning and are continuing to, for lack of a better word, chase more institutional funding, but with a long-term strategy of recreating the model of my previous organization and having lots of people giving us a little bit of money every month rather than being reliant on one or a handful of big donors. My background, it surprises people to know, is actually corporate public relations. But a long, long time ago in New York, and during the dot-com boom and bust and pre and post 9/11, back then when the economy started, you noticed really quickly that it's better to have 10 clients giving you 10,000 a month than it is to have one client giving you 100,000. It's always better to have lots of small donors than it is to have a handful of large ones, because then, first of all, they tend to be less restricted. And second of all, that's how you build a movement. Success in activism is not just about doing the work. It's about long-term systemic change. And the best way to do that is to have a veritable army of people who are invested in your work.
And do you see a big difference going from an organization where you had lots of individual donors to now starting with a more of a grant focus, going into individual donors? Is there a difference?
There's a lot of differences. I mean, first of all, it took a while to build up that base of regular donors. I remember when we hit like £100 a month. Yeah, but it was much easier back then to build supporters, right? And to build engagement. Because Twitter was a very wholesome place and Facebook was a very wholesome place. Instagram didn't exist, but it was pretty easy to go, I don't want to say viral, but like baby viral, which is a funny analogy to use since I run an abortion charity. But every time I was in the news, people would come to us and start getting involved, and we would get them to subscribe to the newsletter. And for a period of time, I had a 1 in 10 conversion rate to donor from the newsletter subscriptions, which was incredible, right? Every time something happened with abortion in markets, in our geographies, which were Ireland, Northern Ireland, and the Isle of Man, as well as the UK, every time something happened in abortion, which was always somebody would get arrested, somebody would die, a migrant or a refugee pregnant as a result of rape was forcibly given a cesarean section. There were European Court of Human Rights cases. Since the organization I started was the first abortion fund in Europe, I was sort of automatically the person who would get asked questions. And also I would get asked questions anytime something happened with abortion in the US, which is where I started my abortion act. We used to joke and say that I was Europe's leading expert on abortion in America, which I probably still kind of am, but it's different now. It's really, really different now. You just can't get the same kind of leverage and followings or even eyeballs on the social media platforms because Twitter is now what Twitter is. We have, as an organization, moved to Blue Sky, but Blue Sky is still figuring itself out. But Facebook used to be a place where we could have conversations with people. And now if we get 2 likes on a post, it's a lot. What we're trying to do is to get somebody to take a chance on us because we know our work is necessary, because we talk to all the grassroots activists doing this work. What differentiates this organization from my previous one is my previous organization was an abortion fund, and it helped people get abortions. So they have a helpline and people contact by phone or email, and then they get financial support and logistical support, either getting signposted to reputable providers of abortion pills, which they can do themselves at home, or information about traveling abroad to a clinic or hospital that will provide the care that the country they live in won't. Sometimes it's people who live in a country but who don't have access to the healthcare system because they are refugees or migrants or international students or U.S. military. We get a lot of calls from, and spouses of U.S. military and spouses of economic migrants, and people who live in places where, because they don't have access to socialized healthcare, they have to pay privately for a healthcare procedure and they can't afford it. And like a lot of other healthcare procedures, it's pretty time sensitive to get an abortion, especially when most of the countries in Europe stop abortion on request after 12 or 14 weeks. So I started the first organization like this in Europe, and now there's about 14, which is wonderful. It's not nearly what's needed, but it's a good start. And every year we would get together and talk about what was needed to make this movement sustainable and scalable, because almost everybody does this work as a volunteer. Very few organizations have staff. A lot of the organizations are not registered NGOs on purpose, sometimes because doing the work in country is against the law, and sometimes because the work that you're doing is legally creative and it's important. Like what we discovered is that a bunch of us joined together in this initiative called Abortion Without Borders to address the growing need in Poland. And at the time it was 6 organizations. Now it's 9. Since we started that in December of 2019, we've helped over 200,000 people in Poland get abortions. And the way we were able to do, and that was during COVID, with millions of Ukrainian refugees flooding into Poland from a country with legal abortion to a country without legal abortion. And what we discovered is, okay, we're all really good at helping people get abortions, but we're all exhausted, we're overcommitted, and we're never doing any of the infrastructure work that is necessary and the knowledge work that is necessary to, first of all, reduce burnout of activists. Second of all, to keep the knowledge not in the heads of 8 people. Thirdly, do the strategic, like the thing with Abortion Without Borders is that in Poland, doing an abortion yourself is legal, whether you take pills or drive abroad to a clinic. But if you help somebody with that abortion, it's against the law. So if your mother loans you money to buy pills or to go to Germany, or if your husband drives you to a clinic, they can be criminally charged. And so the way we set up Abortion Without Borders was to protect the people who were in Poland, both the service users and the activists. We realized that we needed an organization that just did that work. And that's what Supporting Abortions for Everyone is. We're not an abortion fund. We are providing the support to all of the abortion funds. And that includes a lot of new organizations because as much as people think abortion is only an issue in America and in global majority countries, the fact of the matter is it's a hellscape in Europe. That's really the only way to describe it. It's really terrifying because people are sleepwalking because they think it's fine. Founders think it's fine, and women and people who can get pregnant think it's fine. But actually, in reality, in Romania, 80% of public health institutions won't do abortions. In Croatia, 65% of doctors won't do abortions. In Italy, 72% of doctors won't do abortions. That's 95% if you're in the southern half of the country. France just put abortion in the constitution, but they only do abortions to 16 weeks. And we've seen more and more people from France needing to travel to the Netherlands or the UK. Now, 6 countries in all of Europe do abortion on request after the first trimester, which, yes, 90% of abortions happen in the first trimester. But if you think of all the birth controls there are now where you don't get a period every month, and also the fact that the people who need abortions after the first trimester tend to be people who are facing multiple oppressions, right? Whether it's poverty, domestic abuse, insecure immigration status, not speaking the language, developmental learning or physical disabilities, and then having to navigate healthcare systems and needing to travel abroad. It's a crazy world, and we are very excited that we are now actually funded through next year.
Yay! That's great news. Well done. All that help.
What I need is 2 years to build up the army of regular donors. And I say me because my remit in the organization is fundraising, communications, and half the operational work. So I want to get 1 more year in the bank, and then that will give me 2 years to be able to build that army of international donors, which again, my previous organization, it was all English speaking, but now we're talking about pan-European. And so what works in social media and resource gathering in Italy is different from Spain, is differently from Romania, is different from Hungary. And it's probably going to take a larger number of donors because of currencies. I was so thrilled when we have a couple donors from Eastern Europe in currencies where €1 is actually quite a bit of money, but that's what we want. We want the most number of people to have a vested interest in the fact that how much money you have or where you live should not determine whether or not you have a baby or another baby.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mara, as a resource activist, what would you say is your superpower?
I'm told I can be very persuasive. I am very good at meeting people where they're at and doing gentle education. So my neighbor fed our cats a few weeks ago, and she was like, "Do you do abortion for your job?" And I was like, "Mm-hmm." And I know she's quite active in the local Baptist church. And I said, "I know you might not agree with that." And she said, "Well, I don't like it when women use abortion as birth control." And I said, "Well, first of all, the majority of women who have abortions are on at least one kind of birth control." And then we had a larger conversation about, "You're saying she's so irresponsible, she should use birth control. So let's punish her by giving her a baby." Because those take no responsibility at all. And just sort of like doing those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, being an abortion activist and doing this work, it's not actually about abortion. It's about autonomy. And it's about at what point do we think the state can compel somebody to continue a pregnancy that they don't want to continue? And at what point do we think the state knows more than a pregnant person whether or not they can manage this pregnancy? And when you remember that the majority of women, and I'm saying women because the statistic is for women who have abortions, already have at least one child. And so it's not, as people think, it's not feckless teenage girls getting drunk and getting pregnant. It's actually middle-aged women who have children who are, for whatever reason, birth control failure or whatever. But who do we think knows whether or not that person can continue the pregnancy? And any restrictions only hurt poor people. So as I say, my superpower is that I am incredibly, incredibly persuasive, but my kryptonite is sometimes the same thing in that I don't know when to stop. But also, especially with regular donors, I am a queen, right? Like I have gotten donations on the tube. I've gotten donations in the queue for the ladies' room. I once got money off a chugger. For people who don't know what a chugger is, it's the people who stop you on the street who ask if you will make a standing order to Greenpeace or Oxfam. 11 years ago, I got cash off one of them. But when I'm in these more traditional funding spaces, if I have the luxury of being at a funders conference, or if I'm at like a big spaces very often with all these big European NGOs, and they speak this language, which I don't understand. And I attended this really interesting webinar as part of the Uncharitable Festival, which was about how what we call the corporate industrial nonprofit complex can sometimes co-opt the language of activists and then use it against us. So what we call diversity and inclusion and intersectionality suddenly becomes this corporate gobbledygook. And we don't speak it, but their fundraising applications, sometimes even their DEI or intersectionality policies, one thing that was pointed out is that you see in a lot of British foundations that they use this language, but you can tell that it's been written by ChatGPT because it's all American grammar and spelling. So when I'm in these spaces, sometimes they use this language. I was at a funders conference a year and a half ago, and I'd been invited to the conference as a movement leader. So the conference was 80% funders, 20% movement leaders. I was in a session which was about how funders can ensure good leadership and long-term sustainability. And I thought, well, what they were all talking about was succession planning for their own organizations. And I thought you were going to maybe talk about how you need to actually include operations costs in your grants, because if we can't pay ourselves a living wage to do this work, the work isn't going to happen. So sometimes I can be a little too much of a blunt instrument in those places because, first of all, I've just sort of developed that as my personality. Hate public speaking. I'm incredibly shy. When I moved to England, I realized as an American, people expected me to be like a little crude and unmannered and also ignorant. Actually, I leaned in. And it's incredibly liberating, and it's given me more confidence because I'm like, well, I can't go under the expectations. So, and if I do, people will just write me off as that quirky American girl. Sometimes I'm in these spaces and I actually put my hand up and I was like, oh, I thought you all were going to talk about making sure that your grants covered operational costs and salaries. I talked to them about how they needed to think about management and leadership differently, that the best work happening on the ground wasn't necessarily a corporate structure, and they had to think a little more creatively about what leadership actually is. Leadership isn't just the person at the top of the pyramid, especially when more and more organizations are doing job shares and making more horizontal structures. The person who answers the helpline is not less important than your trustee or than your accountant. Is your chief exec really more important than your fundraiser? But then sometimes I wind up going down the rabbit holes with these people, and I know that they're going to think about what we've talked about, but maybe they're not going to write me a check.
A lot of people listening will relate to those frustrations you have with the way that funders are working. And I think that it's interesting and important that you raise the mismatch between what you expected from that situation and what they were going to speak to, and what actually happened. And I think it's really powerful that you spoke up in that situation as well. And it really does demonstrate the many ways in which the funding system isn't working for us all. And on the Fix the Flow Fellowship, we do talk about that a lot. We also talk about setting and defining a collective guiding star for how we would like the philanthropic funding system to look. So I would love to hear from you. Imagining that we are in an ideal philanthropic funding system, your utopian vision, what 3 qualities do you see in that vision?
I'd like to see more activist-informed decision-making. It's been really interesting in the last couple of years that some of these big European NGOs are starting to put grassroots into their language a lot more. Some organizations are trying to do it, and there's all this like participatory grant making, but I think a lot of people, they mean well, but they're doing it wrong, in that the participatory grant making is, let's have a global funding pitch and make everybody who applies judge other people's applications. The last time I did that, I was asked to judge 2 applications. One was about trauma-informed transform sexual and reproductive healthcare in the US, and the other was about childhood sexual and reproductive rights education in India. Now, personally, I did 2 hours of research on both those topics. I don't think everybody did that. It can be quite demoralizing. And also it's very time consuming. But then the little plug for the Gorilla Foundation, because they do participatory grant making. But what they've done is they've set up an advisory board of activists in the areas that they fund. And I'm pretty sure that those people are paid for their contribution. And so those people, they're not fighting for the funding. It's a very interesting thing to be like, we'll think about giving you funding, but you have to judge all your competitors. It makes us all feel like we're working against each other. So activist inform to really understand from the people closest to the ground what is actually needed to do more funding partnerships, long-term, unrestricted funding where you really understand what's needed and you aren't expecting somebody to solve a systemic issue in 12 to 18 months or even 24 months. And then the final thing would be creative and brave, because the solutions to the problems we are facing now, I think the right is rising so fast. And a lot of big organizations that have tons of funding, a lot of them are terrified of rocking the boat, especially on issues like LGBTQIA, gender justice, migrants issues. Basically, the people who are going to be most impacted by the rise of the right are now finding that all of their programs are run by people who are partially funded by governments that are now leaning really far to the right. And so I'd really like to see family foundations and wealthy individuals really take some chances and look at the people who are doing the work, to help. Don't get me wrong, things like European law reform and big pan-European NGOs, they're the long-term fix. But in terms of like what's needed right now, those solutions are creative. One of the reasons we started S.A.F.E is because we know the people who are helping the most oppressed and vulnerable people in Europe get abortions are anarchist collectives that don't have bank accounts and that maybe help people break laws to have the healthcare that they need, right? So we set up S.A.F.E so that we could launder that money. We're a registered Dutch charity. We will take the risk. But we need somebody to believe that the work we're supporting is necessary. That by existing, we're making that buffer. But we need somebody to understand why it's needed. So yeah, brave and creative, because I think that's the future that we're about to face. And especially around abortion. Like if you look in America and everybody's all horrified, but there's this amazing network of over 100 grassroots organizations helping people get abortions that predates the existence of Roe. Before Roe was even the law, there were what we call now mutual aid or community groups that were helping people get to the few states where abortion was legal. There was a network of clergy helping people get to illegal abortion providers. And that's where the future of abortion in America is. It's with people helping each other do self-managed abortion, and it's people helping people cross state lines to get abortions. And that's creative and that's brave, and also it's beautiful, right? Because we're not saving these people. We're not their saviors. We're their sisters. We're their siblings. We're giving them the information and the dosh that they need to make their own choices, but we're not making moral judgments. We're not asking for explanations. We're just like, do you know what? There but for the grace of God go I. I am very lucky to live in this place where I can speak openly about the fact that I will help as many people who want abortions get abortions. It's only because you live in Hungary or Romania, or you're a member of the traveler community, or you live in Galway and you're in a wheelchair and the airport bus from Galway to Dublin isn't wheelchair accessible. These big organizations, they're working, and I believe in a diversity of tactics, but the solutions that will pass through right-moving governments will always fail the most vulnerable people. And any funder who wants to help the people who are most at risk need to be creative and brave. So yeah, activist informed, long-term partnerships, and creative and brave. Those are my 3.5 qualities.
That's amazing. I love that. That's excellent. And Mara, what advice would you give to someone looking to become a resource activist?
Do a lot of online dating. Fundraising is slightly less soul crushing. but just slightly. No, I would say just be prepared to get knocked back a lot. In any other gig, because I've been a freelancer and a 0 hours contractor and all those other things, and I always say under promise and overproduce. But with fundraising, I'm the exact opposite. So the budget that we've just sent to our board to True for 2025, there's no way I'm hitting those targets. But I'm still putting them down because that's what you need. You need to have the confidence. Do you know what? We all say have the confidence of a mediocre white man. I have the confidence of the cat that we're fostering, right? Because have you ever met a cat with imposter syndrome? You have not. And and this is what you need to fundraise. It's like, I am worth $1 million. I'm so not worth $1 million, but the work is worth $1 million. And you just have to fail spectacularly on a regular basis, because if you're doing your job right, you are constantly failing, right? You are failing 90% of the time.
That's such an interesting way to think about it, and hopefully helpful for so many people, because rejection is such a frequent thing that you have to deal with as a fundraiser.
It's really because we are all so passionate about this work that we're doing, and there's so little funding, especially in Europe, especially around sexual and reproductive rights. Like, there was just this beautiful grant opportunity that would have been perfect for us, but you had to be headquartered in certain countries, but the work that we do would be illegal in those countries. It's a lot of rejection, and that's what you have to be prepared for. And you always have to remember that your commitment to the work is the most important thing. Like if you don't believe in the cause of the place that you're working, if your job is grant writer, or if your job is major donor person, if you don't absolutely love your cause, then you need a different job, because it's only through blind faith that you can keep going.
And what a fantastic reminder to leave us on, I think. Really, really powerful. And thank you so much for joining us today, sharing more about your work and your experiences, and how you kind of got to this place in your journey. And thank you so much to everyone who has been watching. If you enjoyed the episode, please do like, comment and subscribe, and share with any fundraisers and grant makers in your life who are in need of a little bit of sparkle in their journey. And you can also apply to join our movement of resource activists by clicking the link in the description below, because together we can fix the flow of resources for good.